joining us tonight. I am Annelie Langerak, a board member of the FCCT, and we are very delighted to have Pim and Mai and Philip and Chon with us tonight for a topic I'm very excited about, reclaiming the local narrative in the English-dominated world. And I would like to invite the speakers to come up on the stage, and Chon, who will moderate the event. Thank you very much.
Is that okay? Please bear with me, it's my first time moderating. Hi, my name is Chon Thanatkan Thanatilut. It's such a great pleasure to be here tonight. I have talked about this topic passionately, privately in my circle of friends for years, and it feels exciting and really nervous for me to take it out to the public for the first time. Before we begin, I'd like to say something quickly. I really wish our friend Richard was here with us tonight. He had always made me feel so welcome every time I'm here, and I'm sure we all miss him so much. Yeah. So a quick introduction about myself is that I just wrote 3 books for Lonely Planet about Thailand. So one was already published, the second one's coming out next month, and the third one I just finished editing with the editor like literally yesterday. And I'm also launching my own free copy travel magazine in a month. We'll also have some social media as well. We're called Treasures Thailand, so please give us a follow on social media. Sorry, self-PR, that's no more now. Okay, so let me introduce you to my friends here tonight. Starting right next to me here is Mai Nadon. His book, Welcome Me to the Kingdom, was one of the best books I read last year. Definitely one of my all-time favorite books so far. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. You can find it like all Kinokuniya. It's like a collection of short stories about Thai going through sort of like a poverty, financial crisis. It's really moving, yeah. And next one is Pim Wangde Chawat. Her book, The Moon Represents My Heart, did I say that correctly? Is getting developed into a Netflix film right now, so that's really big news. And you can also find her books at like all Kinokuniyas and several countries throughout the world as well, right? Same as your book as well, Mai. Yeah, so if you haven't read her book, I really recommend it as well. It's about time traveling Asian something. And I'm sure next one, you've already seen him or definitely have seen his books. Very Bangkok in the city of senses and very Thai, everyday popular culture. You can actually also buy some of his books at the FCCT tonight. Philip has been living in Thailand for 30 years, and that's almost as long as I have been alive, actually, because I'm turning 31 next month, so I'm almost as like he's been here almost as long as I've been alive. His books are definitely like great to make like presents, like if you want to buy like a Christmas gift for your friends back home, definitely I definitely recommend his book, so they get to know Bangkok and Thai culture on like a much deeper level. So let's start. So like the topic is like reclaiming the local narrative in the English dominant world, right? And I think there's a lot of like struggles that come with that, you know, like language barrier is definitely one thing. Like we don't have that many Thai writers who write books in English, so language barrier could definitely be one thing, but there are also other struggles, but However, I really do believe that things are changing for the better. And I'd like to explore more into that topic with you guys together tonight. Let's go into my first question. Are you guys ready? Why is it important for the locals to be given an opportunity to tell their own stories or culture? Maybe Mai and Pim can answer this question. I'll have one for you after. Yeah.
Thanks, Mai. I think it's very important for locals to tell our own stories, especially in English, because as everyone knows, like English is such a widespread language, and the reality is that you reach more people with English. And when the dominant narrative about Thailand is something that is either inaccurate or inauthentic to the actual experience of Thai people living in Thailand, then that is something that needs to be rectified. And I feel like in general, it's always important for the owner of the stories to have the loudest voice whenever we tell a story. I think that's something.
I'm just. Is this on?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna follow on with that. Everything Pim said, absolutely. And the other thing I was thinking about when Chun suggested this topic, and I was like, oh no, I'm a fiction writer writing in English. What does it mean for an English language fiction writer to be reclaiming a local narrative, right? And my immediate instinct is like, I shouldn't be on this panel. I don't want to do this, John.
I'm glad you're on it.
But so, because you kind of come across like two immediate barriers, and one of them being that if I'm writing in English, publishing in the West, as we both are, I'm writing predominantly for an American and UK audience, English-speaking audience, and the books are imported into Thailand, but my publisher's in the States. So that's sort of the audience problem of the English language. And then on the other side, the fiction problem is that if you're a fiction writer, you sort of have to believe, like the tenet of fiction is that anybody can write about anything. And if, so these things kind of come into conflict with this idea of reclaim. And so I was trying to think of a way to rectify that, I guess. And one of the things I was thinking of, and this came up in a panel we were on together that we were talking about, is this idea of, on an individual level, it's true, or it can be true, that each writer, whether Thai, whether foreign, writing in English about Thailand, should have the freedom to do that, and that's sort of something that's important for fiction to exist. But it becomes a problem, the way that Pim described, once it's on a systemic level and you only have certain voices, and especially given it's an English language audience, if you ask, I remember going to college, to a very liberal, progressive school, and having jokes about like riding elephants and stuff like that in a sort of pseudo-ignorant way.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, but it's the idea is that like you're writing into these stereotypes, right? And so like, if you're an English language fiction writer and the world of fiction in English has only been white men in the past or white people, then you're sort of populating that space in a way that it hasn't been before.
Yeah. Do you have something to say in this particular questions as well? Do you agree with what they've just said?
Well, I do agree. My career was as an editor before I became a writer, and I came to Thailand because I was offered a job to set up a city listings magazine in 1994. And from the very beginning, we made a point to hire Thai writers in English wherever we could. And there are quite a lot of people who've gone on to be quite significant writers or editors, some publishers, and some of them, their very first writing in English got published was in Metro, or in the later Time Out guidebook to Bangkok that I did. So it's quite a good platform, and I think that's a fundamental thing to look at here, is what are the platforms that Thai writers can get onto in English. There's not so many, but as a city magazine, we thought that was really important. And some of those people have gone on to do other careers, like in TV documentaries, or quite a few went into bands, actually writing lyrics, which is quite a different kind of development. But I think it's important to offer that platform.
Cool. Question. This one is for Mai and Pim only. Are you both trying to imply by any means that content about Thailand can only be created by Thai people and non-Thai people are not allowed to touch it?
Not at all. I think, like Mai said, I think it's especially as fiction writer, that's the beauty of fiction, that we can inhibit different experiences than our own and kind of find a way to translate that to a medium that other people can enjoy and relate to. But I think what is important is that every story should be authentic. I think when it's
what
cultural.
happens when it's not authentic, when it's cultural?
I think, like Maya mentioned, it does create more damage than maybe damage is a too extreme a word. Like maybe it creates false perceptions of what a place and a people is like. Like, for example, growing up, I feel like a lot of fiction books about Thailand written in English are usually crime writing, and there's always the narrative. There's always like, a dead female Thai prostitute, and there's like the underbelly, seedy side of Bangkok, and that's kind of the dominant narrative. And I think that, I don't know if you already have a question about this, Sean, but it also affects how...
Yeah, like what's your experience like being a Thai woman, living, like, because you went to uni in the UK, so as a Thai woman going to school in the UK, or being a Thai woman now living in Bangkok and being open to dating foreigners in Bangkok, like what kind of stereotypes or judgment have you had say to you?
Oh, so we're touching on my dating life. That's so fun.
That's the panel discussions about, you guys.
But I think this is actually a kind of a big thing, because I think as a Thai woman in white spaces, for example in the UK, you're very conscious of the fact that you're Thai and how you're perceived. When I was living in the UK, I've gotten like comments about like Corona thrown at me, or like, the C word and stuff like that. But that's for like being Asian in general. But as a Thai woman, I've gotten comments about like, oh, you look like a stripper, or going to a pub and someone saying that,
how much do you charge, that kind of stuff, yeah.
Or just like, oh, I've always wanted an Asian wife, or
yeah.
Someone coming up to me and wanting pictures in the pub, which I don't think it's because I looked hot. I think I looked hot at that time, but I think it was also for different reasons. Like people complimenting me on my looks in a racist way, or just the assumption that because you're a Thai woman, there are certain
boxes
that you fit into, or certain expectations of what people expect you to be. And I think that stems from basically the common narrative or the common misconceptions about Thailand and Thai people in general.
Yeah, circling back to the question originally asked, like, are you trying to like imply or say at all that only content about Thailand has to be written by Thai people only?
Yeah, I mean, also no, obviously, and I think part of that is the word claim, and sort of having claim or ownership over a topic seems to suggest that there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And so, like Pim says, the experience that she's describing is that there's only one predominant narrative in English or in the West, and it's about diversifying sort of that Thailand's national identity as it exists in the world.
Yeah, I want to circle back to Pim's dating life, but I want to ask Philip, okay, so yeah, that's one side of the coin, but what is it like for you as a white man living in a country like Thailand? Like, how do people see you?
Well, I wouldn't say it's not entirely the flip side of what Pim was saying, but there is, There's also prejudice attached to preconceived ideas of a white man living in Thailand. You know, it's the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. We know why you're living there. I hear this so often, less now than I used to, but I was very conscious of it when I got here. And pretty much everything I've been involved in writing with guidebooks, magazines, and my own books, Very Thai, Very Bangkok, has been to try and get away from those cliches and to try and find ways of approaching the place that would overcome that. That's actually why I chose the senses as the medium in Very Bangkok, was because everybody has senses and it takes you into the moment rather than the preconceived idea. It's trying to overcome the bias, if you like. I mean, I'm not ignoring those topics, but I tend not to. They've got lots of mentions in the index, but they don't have chapter titles. It's a way of, because otherwise I'd be pigeonholed, oh, you're writing about that topic. If I had a Patpong headline in a book, immediately people say, oh, it's one of those books about Patpong.
Yeah.
So I deliberately avoided all of that. But there's an awful lot about the realistic aspects of that in the text.
Cool.
So it's trying to represent a fairer view and trying to overcome the stereotypes.
And we're very thankful for your books, for sure. So let's explore more on the struggles now that we have talked a little bit about the stereotypes and the importance of it and whatnot. Maybe all three of you can help me answer this question, but what stopped more Thai writers to write more in English?
Everyone's looking at me fast. I think the biggest thing is obviously education. In Thailand, it is a privilege. It's considered a privilege to be able to write in English or be able to converse fluently in English, and that is because of the way our education system is set up, like the way Thai kids are educated, which is not it's not very
It's not very good.
It's not very good. Newsflash.
Newsflash,
I think that's one of the biggest reasons is that we are Thai people are hindered by a system that doesn't tap into their full potential, especially like academically or like in terms of like this is a tangent, but I think the biggest problem is education, and there's also this kind of so it creates this perception that just because you're able to speak in English or write in English, you're inherently better than Thais who can't, and that's something we need to change. And there's also needs to be more support for Thai creatives.
Yeah. What about the other two? Philip, do you want to go?
Well, I think one aspect of this is also translation. Thais could still write in Thai, and if there are really good translators, then there can be a readership for them. My experience through living here has been there's not been enough written in local literature that's translated into English to get a handle on it, and so certain authors become very highlighted because they've had good translators, but the rest of it we just don't know about it, and there's just not much communication of who are the good writers in Thai. There is a very good new translator who's translated Prabda Yoon's books for Tilted Access Press. She's extremely good, and Prabda Yoon's book, I'm trying to think of what the name of it. The title will come back to me, but it's a very abstract, playful novel with a lot of very strange language in it and a lot of playfulness. And he's got some ways of using words that can't readily be translated into English, and yet this translator had managed to do it very effectively. So I think that that's another aspect that could be looked at. So Thai writers themselves don't have to feel compelled to write in English if there's a group of good translators.
Yeah. What about you, Mike?
Yeah.
Because you also went to international school. Yeah.
I mean, just to go off what Philip was saying for a sec. Also, that translator, Mui Pupok Sakun, right?
Yeah.
she then translated a short story collection and a novel by Dionwat Pimona, and she said at the time, and it was also published, I think, by Tilted Access in the UK as well, and she said at the time that it was the first time a novel by a Thai woman had been published by a non-Thai press in English. So basically, like something that, you know, happened decades ago for countries like Japan and Korea, and so like there's a translation problem, and then the other side of that is the audience problem of people in the US, people in the UK to a lesser extent don't want to read translation. And this is changing a little bit because the Japanese just write really cool stuff, and so like the market is changing. But like Philip said, one side of it is that there's just not enough translation. The other side of it is the privilege part. Your question sort of made me think of the Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own essay, which is, you know, like over 100 years old now, but it was about why aren't there more women writers at the time, and her response was kind of like, women need a room of their own, and it goes into this thing. But actually, the essay is titled A Room of One's Own, but in the essay itself, she says money and a room of one's own, and she like specifies an amount. And so it is like those two parts of privilege, right? The space to write, the security to write, and security being financial as well.
Yeah, I want to circle back to Pim because like you went to Thai school before you switched to international school and before you went to the UK. For some of the audience who may not have experiences with Thai school, can you tell us a little bit more about like the differences that you found in a Thai school and when you international school?
This is a great question. I remember when I moved from my Thai school to my international school, it was a big adjustment. So the first thing that's different is that in Thai school, we're not very encouraged to be individualistic or to do critical thinking or to even just to voice our opinions in class. So what happens is that we would just sit in a classroom, just one classroom for the whole day, and then a teacher comes in, and they'll usually write something on the blackboard. And what we do is we copy it down and then we memorize it for our exams. So one of the biggest change for me when I moved to an international school is that I was expected to have an opinion on things. Like we would read, for example, we would read a book in class and the teacher would be like, oh, what do you think the author is saying? And I was expected to like raise my hand and have something to present to the rest of the class. And that was a big challenge. And I was also asked to, for example, like do a project. Like think of what, like for example, I did drama. I had to like write my own play, like cast my own actors and stuff like that. All these like projects that I had to show initiation and creativity and individualism, which are things that aren't very encouraged in Thai schools. But don't get me wrong, there are aspects of Thai school that I feel like are great and really kind of ground the students to the reality of living in Thailand and what Thai society is like. But what is really lacking is that encouragement of individualism and personal like passions.
Cool. Can I move on? I'm moving on. What's it like to be? Sorry, Philip, I promised there are more questions for you, but I want to ask these two first. What's it like for a Thai writer getting published by an international publisher? Like, did you have to go through any extra mile for your editor or your publisher to understand your book? Like with my book, like you leave in a lot of the Thai words in there, and that was actually my first question to you when I read your book, was that what was your experience like, you know, getting this book edited by an American like editor? So yeah, like with the cultural differences and stuff, like this industry is not very like diverse. So like was there any like burden of a writer of color that you have to go through?
Do you want to go first? I'll go first. I think my publisher in the UK is very, very good. So they didn't have any problems in terms of like trying to change what I've written. But I think my first novel isn't about Thailand, it's more about like my Chinese, like my Chinese heritage, so my Chinese family. And I think the biggest kind of obstacle, like culturally, when it came to that, was in the process of querying, like finding an agent or finding a publisher who would want to publish the material. And I think the feedback that I got, because in the UK, the publishing industry is very white, like people in positions of like power are all white, and the feedback that I got most of the time was that they can't relate to the characters, which is an interesting like feedback. Like they feel like one agent was like, "Oh, I think your writing is great, but I can't relate to these characters," which kind of makes me wonder about how many works of writers of color get lost along the way just because the person on the receiving end, quote unquote, can't see themselves in the work. So that's one of the biggest like thing. And another thing is that I think you're more conscious of the fact that you're in the minority. So you can't really, you carry the pressure that I think maybe a white author doesn't when you kind of like write about your heritage, because you're like, oh, am I leaning into a stereotype? You kind of like second guess everything more because you want to do a good job of quote unquote representing where you're from.
Yeah, I think Pim has sort of like broken this glass ceiling already, in the sense that like the other side of this question is that if you are a Thai writer writing, a book of fiction, then you're expected to write something that's representative, right? You're expected to write something that represents Thailand. And Pim, by writing like a sci-fi novel, speculative sci-fi, is already like on the next stage where she's skipped having to do the representation trap, which of course, if you're, a typical American writer, you're not expected to have to represent the city of Boston or something like that. And so I'm sort of still stuck on that playing field, which is below where she has, which is this kind of freedom. But that said, I think US publishing is getting more receptive. Just speaking from the American perspective, there's last year and then the beginning of this year, there are a number of Southeast Asian writers, mostly living in the States now, from Singapore, from Malaysia, who have published like big blockbuster historical novels in English. The Great Reclamation is one of them. The Storm We Made is the one that just came out last month, is another one. And I think that publishers are throwing a lot of money into this. And so it does feel like it's changing. And Southeast Asia, which has been overlooked, is finally kind of part of the conversation.
Cool. My next question, as a Thai writer, and I think this question goes to like any Thai artist trying to create, like photographer, videographer, whatever as well, is that how do you break away from the seniors' expectations or the old traditions? Like, for example, like we don't have that many like photography competitions in Thailand, and when we do, they are usually like organized by the government or ministry that, and the topics are usually like คนไทยน้ำใจงาม like พ่อหลวงเก่งที่สุดในโลก like the Thai king is like the best king in the world, or like Thai people are the kindest, like the topics are always like in that box, and like obviously that's not gonna get you published internationally. So how do you break away from the senior expectation and just that conservative traditions box in Thailand?
That's such a hard question. Maybe my answer is it's too easy, but I feel like so many young Thai people are doing that nowadays, like more than people realize. I think the biggest answer would be social media, like the internet. And I feel like a lot of young Thai people right now are more intelligent, smarter, bolder, braver than quote unquote the old guard, or people aren't from that group think they are. Give them credit for. Like I feel there's so many young Thai creatives who are trying to, even though they're like trying to find a way, they're like maybe their work aren't as like quote unquote polished, But there are so many young Thai people on Instagram or on YouTube or on TikTok who are trying their hand at doing creative things, and even on Twitter, or like just voicing their opinions in a way that I feel like when I was younger, my generation would never do. So I feel like that so many young Thais are doing that actively. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just kind of like that's just me giving props to the young Thai generation.
The younger generation seem to like push back like a fair bit, right? In today's world, like push back the old traditions a bit,
I'd say that in writing about Thailand in a non-fiction way, I face a barrier like that as well. There's certain expectations about how Thailand should be written about. And when I arrived here, most of the books were written in a very establishment kind of way. Many of them were quite academic or by collectors. But it was generally taking as read a certain attitude of what Thailand is and how it is presented. And I remember going to a Thai studies conference, which was held at Thammasat, and a very prominent academic from, I think, SOAS, or one of the international universities that does Thai studies, she apologized for all of the misrepresentation that they'd done in the past because they hadn't realized it was so different than how it was presented. So even these academics looking into Thai history and Thai sociology and things like that, they had not quite cottoned on to what was really happening. They had swallowed the national narrative, even though they were tough academics and that was their job. But it had somehow slipped through. And I guess you'd call it the Da Sawang kind of moment that's happened. People that have these Da Sawang moments in their own lives, even academics are having it, about how is represented different in a different way than it was in the past. And that presents problems when there's a shift in public opinion when you're writing about it in English to the outside world. Quite how far do you go? Are you leading the story or are you just behind the story? What can you say? It's a difficult balance to strike.
I think that's actually quite a good point to raise, because I also went to a Thai school until when I was like 14, right? And the Thai history books that we had to study in school were just like there's always like a hidden message they were trying to send, and it's always one side of the story.
I'm also thinking of the beginning of Philip's very Thai book that I was reading the introduction again, and you make this distinction between pop culture and then like Wattanatham Thai being like state mandated, top down kind of culture. Last time Pim and I were on a panel for the Nielsen Hayes Book Festival, I had just brought my Filipino writer friend who was in town for it to the Museum of Contemporary Art. And I sort of told the story. We were walking around and he kind of laughed at me and he was like, this is contemporary art. It's like all Ramakien depictions, like over and over again. He's like, this is a thousands of year old myth and this is still what's being represented. And so part of it is also just like the state sponsorship, like you said, getting around that. I will say for fiction writers, fiction sort of rewards the outsider. And so in some ways, it sort of helps when you're writing fiction anyways to go against the grain, and so to be looking in from the outside. And so I think fiction writers kind of naturally find themselves in this position where they're not taking whatever the message from above is to begin with.
I think like support from the authorities in this field would definitely touch on one of the struggles, that why there aren't more Thai writers in Thailand. For sure, like we don't really have many grants, like hardly exist like grants for the art and creative people. And every time I think any typical Thai kid growing up, if you were to tell your parents that, okay, you want to grow up and be a writer, you want to grow up and be a singer, like a typical Thai family would definitely respond with like, how are you going to make money? You're going to be a starving artist, so that's also like, support from the authorities, education system and sort of culture and mindset and that kind of stuff as well, I think all contributes to why we don't have more Thai writers. Yeah. So you are mixed, like you're half Thai, half American. How does that shape your perspective about Thailand? Like, do you feel like your point of view about Thailand, like, it's Thai enough, if I may say that word? Like, what is Thai enough, anyways? Like, do you feel like you have like any challenges in understanding or researching about your character?
Yeah, all the time. I also think it's like an advantage and then a disadvantage sort of in different parts. The advantage part is that as an English language writer, I am a good intermediary between Thailand and the West, and sort of writing for an English language audience, I feel like I know what I have to translate culturally, and sort of what might be allowed. And then on the other side, yeah, I mean, all the time there are barriers whether talking to people about, certain things, and I don't know anything. Basically, I've never had any Thai schooling as well. So like, as soon as you get to the higher registers of Thai, which are beyond my daily badminton talk with my Thai friends, it's sort of like, that's when I start to substitute all, democracy and whatever, all these words come in. And so I do feel that hindrance. Yeah.
Okay, cool. We're actually doing really well with time and my questions, so I think we'll have a lot of time for your questions later. So be ready for that. I'll quiz everyone. Philip, you as a non-Thai person, obviously, writing about Thailand, what's that like? Like, have you gotten any comments, any pushback, like, at all by any means? Or, like, when you're a foreigner being stationed in Thailand and writing about Thailand, sending the work back to your office back in your home country or overseas, was there ever any pushback of like, no, we don't want this topic, like, or like anything like that at all? What's it like being you?
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes, yes.
Well, I'll address the point you're getting at the end there. I mean, I think a lot of journalists in this room will know that they might file stories about Thailand from lots of different perspectives. And certainly a long time ago, say before, like about 15 years ago, it was very difficult to get the editors at those native home country media to publish those stories, and they would always want to put the stories that confirm the stereotypes that the readers expected. And this was a common complaint among journalists in this building. I think it's a lot easier now. I think there's a lot more interest in Thailand. There's a lot more stories to tell. In terms of my own writing and approach, when Very Thai was coming out, my publisher said, "You do know people will attack you." And she had in mind these self-appointed guardians of Thai culture, of the high culture. Because what I was effectively doing by looking at the street life and the everyday things in people's lives was putting low things into a high culture format and calling it culture. And that was mixing ground and sky, high and low, something you're not supposed to do in formal Thai culture. But I was very lucky, really. Maybe 5 years before, or even a couple of years before, I might have been had pushback from some of those cultural guardians. But it happened that there just started to be a bit of an indie wave coming when a lot of people in different fields were looking to explore that area of life. And there was even a movie called Manakon, which came out just a few months after my book, and obviously been written at the same time. It must have had 2/3 of the same subject matter in it. And so the minds were working on the same material in different media. You'd see this in other fields like fashion photography or advertising. And so I think the popular culture was pregnant, and the book became the book of the topic. So I was very lucky with the timing. But in many ways I was tackling a bit of a taboo, but I did it in a kind way, and all the way through I was trying to present the local rationale. I truly loathe the word bizarre or strange or funny or odd. When people describe Thailand or any other culture like that, it's really treating it as something that can't be understood, or it must be magical, or it must be exotic, or it must be somehow a different moral plane. And so I'm obsessive about trying to find the reasons for things, and so those were generally Thai reasons for things that I was presenting, and I think that's why it was accepted very well by Thais. I don't know how you feel about it.
You don't need my approvals on how I feel about things. No, it's true. Like the word bizarre, and also like if you're on Instagram or TikTok recently. Like, I don't have TikTok, but if you do, like there's so many like early 20s tourists flying into Thailand right now, staying for like a week and doing a reel on Instagram caption weird things Thai people do part 2, you know, and it's always like part 4, part 6, and it's always a bunch of collections of like our culture, you know, that they don't understand, and then they just put the word weird at the front of it, like the word bizarre that Philip gave an example of, which I don't think is fair. And you've lived in Thailand for like 30 years, and I don't doubt that, you know, you're more than knowledgeable to write about Thailand, you know, but do you feel like you're missing out on any nuance, any tiny details, any language barrier of not having grown up here as a child? Like for me, I have so many stories that I grew up with from hearing them from my grandmother, you know, like do you feel like, you're missing out on anything when you're writing about Thailand, even though you've been here for a while?
I miss out on an awful lot, particularly regarding language and those intimate things in family and what's said in the schoolyard and all those kinds of casual things. So I just have to work a bit harder to find those out through other people. My sources, actually, I would say, there's different types of sources. There's first-hand experience of things, then there's written sources, people who've studied things, but also there are a lot of people, typically from younger generation, who have been incredible informants and guides and people who accompany me on trips, and or else people I go and visit, and they were definitely from a generation where they were rebelling against their parents and grandparents. So basically those previous generations had tended to flatten any difference in order for uniform Thainess to be applied to their lives. And so they were living Thai lives, and really any of their ethnic origin or regional origin and so forth was being smothered. And this generation that maybe we're talking about since 2000 really, so these people are now probably in their 40s, a lot of them in their 20s then, were trying to find their roots and trying to understand how they came to be, why was everything being tried to be made the same, and they were interested in the differences. And I think that's an interesting concept here, because in Thailand, like a lot of Asian countries, there's an emphasis on harmony, particularly imposed from above, which smothers everything out, like putting a gel over it all. But when actually the differences, they don't have to be divisive differences, but they're often to do with the texture and meaning of things. And so I found a lot of young people were the best guides to that, because they were questioning it in their own lives. And maybe these are sort of people, if they had maybe better writing skills, would be good authors, but maybe they haven't had that training.
Do you guys agree with that? Do you have anything to add?
I'll just add from what Philip said. I think it's very refreshing and very helpful when example, a foreigner who's writing about Thailand or a foreigner who's engaging with Thai culture, to not be defensive and kind of accept the fact that, oh, I don't know everything, or there are things that I'm missing out on. I think that's very refreshing. And what you're doing is that basically leaving space and elevating the Thai voices that can help add to that. I think that's a very commendable way of approaching things.
There's a funny story relating to that. There's an Asian Studies department in Leeds University, and the professor there had noticed a very strange pattern with the thesis choices among his students, and he couldn't see the connecting link, and it turned out that somebody had got hold of very Thai, and students decided to take topics from it and go into greater depth on all these different kinds of topics. So it was like a spark, but they were going into much greater depth, which is, it shows that there's a kind of pregnant need for going into greater depth of these cultural touchstones.
Yeah. Mai, would you like to add something before I actually gonna move on to my last question?
I forgot what the question was, but I was thinking earlier.
Like, does he feel like he's missing out on any nuance or detail for not being Thai?
I mean, I feel like I'm missing out on nuance and detail.
He's more Thai than you.
From not having read his book before I wrote my short story collection. I pulled it off my dad's bookshelf a couple of years ago, and I remember flicking through it and being like, oh, I wish I had this book, which I told him earlier. Yeah. My contribution.
Can I add something about we talked a lot about like stereotypes and like trying to leaning away from it, but I think it's also important to kind of investigate why those stereotypes exist in the first place. And I don't want to embarrass you, Mai, but I feel like your book does a great job of kind of like taking these narratives that people think about, like think of when they think about Thailand, and kind of exploring them deeper, on a deeper level, and kind of turning it on its head. So I don't want to embarrass you, but I think you did like such a good job at that, and I think that's very important.
And I was just telling my friends about your book and trying not to turn this panel to be about how great Mai's book is, but like the characters in my books are basically all working class, if I may use that term, right? And I think in the mainstream media and in art, we don't really get this kind of representatives of their stories. Like, okay, yeah, we see them in the news, right? We see this community in the news, but the story that Mai tells in his book is just like about their struggle, their love life, their love for their partner, the making ends meet. So I think it gives another layer of representative of Thai culture that we don't get to see too much. Yeah. Okay, last question, and then we'll open the floor for your questions. How has the English writing scene in Thailand has changed throughout the year? Is the future looking grim or bright? Like, is there hope at all? The question for all three of you.
One thing I've noticed looking back at early things from the era when I first arrived here, I wasn't familiar with the names of people at the time, but now when I look back, I see that they're all from certain families. There was so much dominance of certain prominent families in every creative field, and now it's much more diverse and wide, and so many more people coming from different backgrounds and regions in the country.
I think it's slowly changing. I think there are more younger Thai people who are more into the arts, or have more, especially through like social media, they have more means to engage with the arts, or more opportunities to just like, try things out and be creative. So I think things are definitely changing, but of course we, as someone who's Thai, I keep saying that we do need more support and more encouragement for the young people who are basically trying new things.
Yeah, I think as far as the English language fiction in the States, for example, there's definitely a lot more. I remember when I started writing in like 2010, around then when I was about to go into grad school, there was only one book of short stories published in the West by a Thai writer, Sightseeing. And now, a few years ago, there was Pichaya Subantat's Bangkok Wakes to Rain.
Yeah.
There's one coming out next year, which is like an immigration story about a woman going from Buriram to LA or something like that by a Thai American writer. And so I think Sightseeing back in the day kind of held the door open, and people are finally catching up and coming through.
I also think it's changing for sure. Younger generations are trying to sort of push back on the old traditions where you only have to work in the academic field to make a living only. I think and a lot of exposure on the internet also helps a lot with the creativities and stuff like that. And I do feel hopeful for the writing for the Thai writers who write in English in the future. The microphone is there. If anyone wants to ask us a question, please. We have so much time.
Hi, Peter Trainer. I'm a club member. I just wanted to ask the panel about a slightly different problem that Thai writers might have. Not the stereotype or the translation problems, but social or political pressure on Thai writers. I got Philip's book a couple of years ago, and I showed it to a Thai girl. She's about 35, a university graduate, a tour guide who spoke very good English. And I showed her a couple of paragraphs from the book that were very non-contentious, not politically motivated or anything. And her reaction was, oh, are foreign people allowed to say things like that about Thailand? She was really surprised. Now, it was only a description of some rundown buildings in Bangkok next to modern high-tech skyscrapers, something like that. But she regarded it as being detrimental, that you just don't do that. And the question to the panel is, she's been through the education system the way a lot of writers who'd been through the education system would be, so they wouldn't write the way that Philip would write about an everyday occurrence. Because of things like Manyarat, you have to be polite. You don't criticize. You don't imply criticism, even if you're describing reality. So how can you describe reality? When I talk to people who used to read articles like Lonely Planet or Time Out, they never regarded them as government propaganda or anything. They used to say bad things about bad things and good things when good things happened. They just took them as reality. You've got some excellent places with some big problems. Can Thai writers say that without upsetting the family, the superiors, the publishers, their editors, their audience? If they're writing, would they be inhibited whether they were writing in Thai or English, but particularly writing in English?
Does anyone want to answer? Would you want to answer?
I could respond while they're thinking about what to say. I could respond directly to that. The answer is that it's agonizing all the time trying to find ways to describe these things that won't be too triggering. And sometimes you just have to use wit, or you have to find a soft way to say something, or maybe you'll tackle a difficult topic through something that's very concrete. It might be some example of a building or something, and you talk about its design. And so you can make the point through something else. But it's often very delicate and sensitive. And
Thai writers do that in English?
from my understanding, it's the authorities worry less about what's in English and much more about what's in Thai. But
I agree.
they might
I think I was a journalist for like 8 years, and my topic was politics as well. And I do feel safer writing about Thai politics in English, for sure. And I would like to add on what Philip was saying is that we do try to find wit and ways to criticize them in our own sense of humor. Like, I wrote one article for Vice about Tinder dating and Thai politics. You know, it's like how Thai don't really want to date someone from the right wings anymore, and they put that on their Tinder. So, you know, it's like that kind of thing. You find ways to do it. I actually, in a way, I do feel like having these limits kind of make Thai people more creative in a way. Was that a good thing to say? But like, if you see all these photos and videos of all the previous protests that we have had, they've always find such funny, creative ways to criticize them, like cutting their hair short, for example. I'm not going more into that.
I want to piggyback on what Sean said, and to answer your question, I think Thai writers can definitely do that, and I think there are some Thai writers who have been doing that. And to follow on what Philip and Sean said, it takes it makes them more creative and maybe like smarter, funnier in the way we express ourselves. And I would say that there are some Thai writers or some even like Thai filmmakers who are, I would use the word like, they're badasses in the way they kind of like just do their own thing. And I feel like because the language barrier or whatever, their work don't reach a certain audience that maybe the people who write in English do.
Yeah, and also because all these like tiny details of wit and nuance that we have had to find ways to express them. You know, if you don't know like about Thai politics on like a really, really good level, you might not like see them or recognize them as well. That's like a really good movie on Netflix right now called Doi Boy, which is a Thai movie about an immigrant working in Thailand as a male prostitute, you know, and it touched a lot on Thai politics, you know. When I was watching it, it reminded me so much of like some of the political refugees in Thailand that have had to like flee away, right? So like that's like many details and many ways to do it for sure, to try and keep us safe. Any more questions? I won't roast you if you're white. You can ask questions.
Some comments actually, but I would like the panel's opinion on this one. First of all, full disclosure, I've lived in Thailand for 40 years now, and I still find it hard to read Thai because everything looks like a run-together sentence. The whole page is no punctuation and all that, and consonants or vowels could be up or down or left or right. And so it's very difficult for me to read Thai literature. But 20 years into being in Thailand, I discovered an amazing series of books, the 20 best novels in Thailand, translated by Marcel Barang, who is a personal friend of ours. And they covered a lot of really, really good local narratives, what I would say are truly Thai narratives that resonate internationally. And I was just wondering why they are not taught at school in Thailand, or even to budding writers, as inspiration. Because these narratives continue to date. Just as an example, one of those 20 novels, Jandara, touches on patriarchy. Of Time and Tide touches on how Hua Hin was ruined. The fishing in Hua Hin was ruined by tourism, which is happening everywhere in the world right now. And there are other very, very important issues that are touched by on those that collection, particular collection. Unfortunately, now you can't even buy it. We can't find it anywhere. So I was just wondering, you know, if this would be a solution. Could we make this novels with universal narratives available to budding writers so that we could have more of these stories out there in the world.
Do you have anything to add to that?
I think ideally, those books and just writing or literature, Thai literature in general, should be taught more in Thai school.
For sure.
But the reality is that they're really not. And like I said, like hopefully things are changing through like social media and like new Thai generations doing new things. But I don't know what else to say for that statement, which is basically I agree that they should be taught more in Thai schools, and that's also another rabbit hole of why certain things aren't taught in Thai schools.
It's definitely another rabbit hole.
Yeah. I could add a couple of comments into that relating to Indonesia. They've got very similar situation. They've got very high literacy like Thailand, but very low readership of novels and books and so forth. But their writers have managed to get out into the outside world a bit more effectively than in Thailand. And there is a thing called the Lontar Foundation in Indonesia, which just translates Indonesian literature. And it's been doing it for 20, 25 years or something. And also the Ubud Writers Festival, which goes on every year in October in Bali. Every year they publish an anthology of Indonesian literature in translation, and these are people from all of the remote islands, not just Java, not just prominent areas. So there's a lot of voices that are being churned out every year, new translations. They tend not to be that long, or they might be excerpts or short stories, but it requires a foundation, and in that case, the Lontar Foundation has got one dedicated person and a team of other translators. But it helps there that Australia has got a whole generation of people who studied Indonesian in schools. And so there's actually quite a lot of Australians who can translate Indonesian into English. And it's a structural advantage that they've got that didn't really happen in Thailand. Anyway, that's just that's a window on something that could happen, but it requires a benefactor.
Yeah, and just the final thing is also that, so for the American example, a lot of the Vietnamese literature, even more recently the Cambodian literature that's in the States, is driven by these diasporic communities. And Thailand never had, thankfully, this sort of cataclysmic event that drove, refugees overseas. And so sometimes it makes it especially difficult in that if you are a Thai writer writing in English, there's not a built-in diaspora audience. And if there isn't a local audience either, then it's sort of like, they're translating these into a void because nobody really wants to read them.
Next question, please.
Thank you, Pim. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Philip, for your insightful perspectives. I'm actually curious about the connection or the interconnectedness between Thai writers writing in English and Thai writers writing in Thai. So the question is there any positive development that you can learn from or observe from the domestic public industry? Because I understand that as international writers, sometimes you guys may come from a very privileged background, and there may be certain topics that fall into your blind spot, maybe due to cultural integration or the gap in the social classes. So yes, are there any things that you can learn from the domestic public industry? Thank you.
Very good question.
Sorry, I didn't. Any things we've learned from the domestic?
Yeah, like do you learn anything from the Thai writers writing in Thai, or like being Thai writing in English, we may come from a certain type of background, and then do you feel like there's any blind spot that we might not see that we could learn from the Thai writing in Thai?
Oh, okay. Great question.
Yeah.
I think one of my best writer friends is Thai, and he writes in Thai. So I don't know if any Thais here would know his name. His name is Win Romantic Rai. So he writes a lot of these. So what's kind of popular for Thai readers at the moment are this genre of books which are called หนังสือฮีลใจ which translates to like healing heart books. And what I learned from watching so many of my younger siblings, Thai siblings who read these books, is that you learn a lot about what the new Thai generation kind of craves at the moment, which are books that kind of make them feel good, which sounds kind of simple, but they are
Well,
like
your books are like so sad and depressing.
yeah, but like me and my friend Win, the writer, we always discuss about why aren't younger Thai people reading more, kind of like quote unquote serious literature, and it's because like my younger siblings would say, like their lives are kind of hard enough as young Thais trying to like make their living and trying to do things differently from the older generation, that what they kind of need is just some words of encouragement at the end of the day. And that's why they gravitate so much towards these books, which are just books with like encouraging quotes, kind of like self-love reminders, and just like things that would make them feel better after they got their heart broken, stuff like that. So it really makes me kind of learn that, yeah, sometimes simple things that aren't considered highbrow literature are the kind of the lifeblood of what Thai people, especially younger Thais, kind of need.
Yeah, I think also the sense of community among Thai writers is like the Nielsen Hayes Book Festival, which is where I met Pim, has only been running twice. They did it once in 2019, and then there was the pandemic break, and then last year. But I remember being there in 2019 and seeing sort of all the bigwig, sort of Utet Himamun and all these people up on stage, and even just it's not a formal sort of passing down of information or even audience or anything like that, but just like the more these types of things can happen and the more kind of you can centralize it, just because writing is a very individual experience, and so there isn't necessarily like an apprenticeship kind of heritage the way there is in like visual art, and so I think that it's starting to change where there is more communication. There could be more independent bookstores. That would be really nice, but not that many yet.
Do you think there's enough readers? My question back to you. Do you think there's enough readers for us to have more independent books? Let's make Instagram reels after this. Would you like to go first? You've been there for... Okay.
Hi. I'm Terry McCullum from Canada. I'm one of the members of the club. And this has been a great presentation, I think. And
thank you.
What hits me is in Canada, we've had a big reckoning with what we call our Indigenous community, and have really pushed that people understand the Indigenous history and culture and all that. When I listen to this tonight, it's almost like the same thing, is that there's not been enough respect for the natural Thai experience. It's not being fairly represented or taken pride in, is what I'm seeing. And you're talking about the need to get people to do things and to write. And I wonder, is the unique political situation in Thailand inhibiting the expression of a lot of feelings and thoughts? Has it discouraged people? That was just a question I thought of to try to connect with taking pride in the indigenous, in other words, the Thai-ness of the country.
Maybe I could comment on that, relating to what I was trying to do with very Thai. I was trying to avoid Thai-ness because it's very much a proscription, and I was trying to describe. So Thai-ness is not a description of everything you find in Thailand. It's basically an ideology of what should be there. Yeah. And so this disjoint between what Thailand is really like on the ground, and what you see written in print is really true. There is a huge disjoint, and it's because of the national narrative. It's what people are taught. It's ingrained through institutions and companies and the media. And I was trying to find things that were not counted underneath that Thainess headline that were nevertheless, they were what Thailand feels like. It's what you encounter in every single street, but they weren't written about. And I'm sure there must be a mountain of things to do with Thai life that applies to.
I'm actually with Philip on this one as well. Like when I heard the question, I thought about the same thing. Like, yeah, Thailand as a country love to put you in a box of Thainess. There's always a question that we all have heard as a Thai is about คนไทยหรือเปล่าวะ you know, like when you do something out of the character of a Thai person. So I don't think, if I may disagree, is that I don't think Thainess is necessarily like the best direction for art to move to. As Philip was saying, that's like, yeah, trying to find, like, Thai is basically everything you encounter in every street, basically, yeah.
To answer your question simply, I think yes, we are inhibited by the unique, quote unquote, unique political situation. And I think that's why so many young Thais feel kind of discouraged and kind of feel like there's not a lot of hope for change. And I think that's why, like I said, when I talked about those like healing hard books, I think that's why so many young Thais are kind of trying to chart their own path instead. I don't know if that answers your question, but yes.
Do you think it's a good start, all these like healing heart books? Like, do you think it's a good start to see Thai writers writing in more diverse subjects in the future? Like, is this like a first door open?
I think some people criticize that genre of books, saying that it's not, basically there's not a lot of craft that goes into it. It's kind of like the criticism that people have for Rupi Kaur, if people know who she is. And I feel like there's definitely merit to that criticism, but I also feel like in order for just Thai writers to just be themselves and find their own way, it's kind of necessary. It's not harming anyone. It's necessary for them to just, you know, write. And some of them might produce what some people might classify as quote unquote kind of like highbrow poetry. Some might not, but I think every piece of work is kind of necessary, if that answers the question. Yeah.
Could I just add one more observation? That's to do with the regions of Thailand and how central Thai norms override everything else. That there's an awful lot of regional stories that would never get told. And it's interesting to look at film where that's starting to happen, and you've got situations where Thai films are in a local dialect, but they're needing to get subtitles for the Bangkok audience to be able to understand them. And I think there's a lot more regional stories and pride in those cultures that is suppressed by this very uniformity that's gone on since the Second World War.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, regional stories.
Hi, my name's Jared. I actually did my PhD thesis in China on this topic. So I was like dealing with the struggle of China's struggle for narrative autonomy in international relations. So I want to add like an international sort of politics dimension to this, because obviously your audience is international, right? Like that's what you're thinking of when you're writing your stuff. And that implies like a struggle for recognition. You want Thailand to be recognized internationally for something. So I guess my question is, like, what aspect of Thainess, sorry to use that, but what aspect of Thainess do you think is most valuable to contribute to the multicultural fabric of global cosmopolitan society?
Obviously, Thailand, land of smile. No, does anyone want to answer that question? I don't have an answer in the top of my head.
I mean, I think it's exactly what Philip just said about this sort of like different narratives, kind of this fracturing of that idea of a single identity, right? And so the more, whether it's regional, whether it's, age, whatever, the more perspectives that are kind of getting in, that ideally the idea of Thainess gets kind of diluted in the public imagination instead of affirmed as this kind of monolithic idea. And so I don't know what Thainess is, but so let me rephrase, how are you trying to portray Thainess? Yeah, I mean, so as a half Thai writer, for example, I have short stories and characters who are half Thai, and there's kind of that identity facet, and hopefully that kind of makes it into the world as another type of Thainess.
My first novel is about a British Chinese family, so there aren't Thai characters in them, but I'm writing about Thai characters for my second book, and it was a question that I asked myself: how am I being conscious about what kind of Thai, quote unquote, Thai people I'm portraying to the world? And I think the more that I was writing, and I came to the conclusion that I'm just gonna write Thailand or Thai people as I am, if that makes sense. Just basically, maybe this is hard to put into words, but I think as a minority, when I'm writing, there's, like I said, there's kind of this, you have to ask the question, what am I representing? And I always come back to kind of I'm just gonna represent my experiences and the experience of the people I know as they are, if that makes sense. Just the humanness.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a qualities of quote unquote Thainess that I want to deliver through my work, 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's just kind of us as human beings and our human experiences, and just how we understand the world and how we understand each other, and how what's it like to move through the streets of Bangkok, for example. I don't know if that answers your question. I think it doesn't really.
It was very good.
I apologize.
Yeah.
It was a very good question, but it kind of touches a little bit on this buzzword at the moment about soft power.
Please don't
because
go there.
Thailand is trying to, it's got completely the wrong end of the stick, thinking that soft power is something you tell people that they should like.
Elephant pants is
just
your
like they
answer.
tell people that they should like XYZ within Thailand. Basically, soft power seems to happen by other people's taste wanting to identify with this place.
Yeah.
So you're not actually in control of what other people feel about you.
Yeah.
You've just got to put out things and see what sticks. And actually something has stuck, and it's totally not what the establishment would want, and that is the boys' love genre internationally. It's but Thailand's biggest export in terms of cultural resonance. All across Asia, it's an enormous hit. And Thailand is a big center of it in comic books and films. But it's not something that the formal culture is terribly comfortable with, but it's a big success, and it's just happened just naturally.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's any particular specific one thing that we want to send out. Where are you from, Jared? Is there the particular one thing that you could tell us that represent everything about you?
About me?
Well, about your country.
Canada?
Snow.
I mean, maybe the French-English divide, I don't know. But in Canada, we talk a lot about multiculturalism and how how each person in Canada, or each society, or each sort of distinct society, or each language, or each culture contributes to sort of a mosaic of cultures where we all sort of learn from each other's human experiences, right? So I mean, there's different versions of the human experience, right? There's a Chinese version of the human experience. There's a Thai version of the human experience, right? And so those versions of the human experience all sort of come together to sort of heighten the understanding of what it means to be human. I'm just wondering what the Thai cultural experience is that they're trying to, as a Canadian, what can I learn from Thailand to enhance my understanding of the human experience? Or what would you like me to learn from your narrative?
I don't know, man. We're just human being, and we're all different. There was this one essay that I wrote recently for Lonely Planet. It's not published yet. It's the title of the essay was "Meet the Thais," and definitely opened my essay with, you know, like not every Thai person is just going to walk down the street and smile, you know. It's like, yeah, Thailand, land of smile, it really puts us in a box. Like, can I have other emotions? Like, it's just, we're all different. I don't know what to tell you.
It's like those stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
If you don't want those stereotypes to get out, exactly what do you want us to know?
Okay, I can answer that. but then I feel like it's not going to be an answer that is.
You just said you could answer.
No,
that.
but I don't think it's an answer that would be academically what you would want in terms, because of my answer would just be that for the larger, quote unquote, larger world to see us as human beings. I know that sounds simple and weird, but like see us as human beings. As opposed to, for example, they would see me as, you know,
an Asian woman.
An Asian woman who's like, ugh. Yeah. That's just
different cultures, different regions. Like, don't put us in the box of being Thai or like an Asian woman. Like,
yeah. I don't think that answers your question academically, but I think it would just be like just.
What it's lacking is a unique thing that makes your particular art different from a Canadian's art or an American's art.
That I would just say my art is made by a Thai person, and it's about Thai people, and it's set in Thailand. So that'll be the
Mai, would you like to have a go at answering Dara's question? Would anyone like to answer Dara's question? Any Thai person? Okay, next question. We'll circle back to that.
This may be redundant after that conversation. I felt more silly sitting down, not asking it, than actually asking it. But for Mai and Pam, do you see yourself as a Thai writer, or because you grew up here and then went abroad, educated abroad, do you see yourself as a global writer or just a writer? Did you go through a process or any angst?
Yes.
To come to that, to a decision, if you even had to make a decision about that, and then connected or maybe not connected, do you feel there are expectations or burdens on you for what you say when you write? And lastly, do you think that you might write differently if you wrote from abroad than writing here?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's a phrase again in the beginning of Philip's book, and that like Bangkok rewards the flaneur. I can't remember whether you wrote that or your person who wrote the preface said that, but I sort of think about that a lot as well, because like a flaneur typically is somebody who walks, right? And of course in Bangkok, nobody actually walks around. And so like naturally the person who's walking is the outsider. And so I sort of think about that as like, it's the outsider status is necessary to being able to do the work, but at the same time, the definition of what kind of writer you are, the aspirational writer is just to be a writer, but if you're writing in the States, if you're writing, or you're publishing in the States, publishing in the UK, naturally you get pigeonholed as a Thai writer, and what I'd like to move towards is just being writer kind of without definition, without representation, which is why I really admire what Pim's already done, because she's already done that basically.
That's very sweet. I would say that for me, I would like Mai said, I would just want to be a writer, but because of the way publishing is structured, especially like in the West, and how I fit into that system, I would have to see myself as a writer who's Thai, if that makes sense. And to answer your question, I definitely feel like there are kind of pressures, or I wouldn't call them burdens, but there are pressures that I kind of questions that I have for myself that maybe an author who's part of the majority, like maybe like a white author, wouldn't have to question. Like for example, like I have to question, oh, am I Thai enough to write this? Am I Chinese enough to write this? Or kind of like, oh, am I representative of the entire culture? Which is a ridiculous question and doesn't really go anywhere. But because of how publishing is structured, and because everything is still very uneven. Those are the kind of the pressures that come with being, for example, an author of color in a predominantly white industry. If that answers the question.
Yeah. If we don't have any more questions, okay. Last question.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ling. I'm a club member and a fan of Mai's book. And this is a question that struck me while I was reading your book, but the question can be for anyone, really. So this is to touch upon the aspect of translation a little bit, as you know, you're writing about something Thai for, I guess, mostly foreign audience. And what is your decision or like thought process when deciding which term to keep in Thai, but you know, anglicize it, and which term to just translate into English completely? And this one came from when I was reading your use of the word Poon Ban, you know, like floor house. And to me, as a Thai reading this book in English, to me, like Poon Ban is so simple. Why does it have to stay in Thai, for example? Thank you.
How would you translate Poon Ban to English, first of all?
Yeah, I don't know if you have a... So I was sort of surprised when I was writing the book and being edited and then being copy edited, the words that I thought would be easy words that people kind of got stuck on. And one of the cheats, and I learned this from some other book, I think it was a Japanese book, one of the ways I've started to do it, especially if it's in dialogue, is just to have a character kind of repeat the word. So you say it in Thai, in the Thai word written in English, and then you have the English word afterwards, after a hyphen or something like that, in the way that it's sort of natural in dialogue when we're speaking for us to repeat the end of a word, and especially in Thai, which has a lot of wordplay. And so like in dialogue, you can often kind of sneak it in, and then if it's not in dialogue and it's just exposition, then you're sort of stuck with this, what kind of audience are you writing towards? And a lot of, for example, American authors who use Spanish in their work can assume like a base level of Spanish, but coming from Thailand, you can assume very little, you know, beyond the word soy or something.
Yeah, soy. What about you? Because Philip, you also have a bunch of Thai words in your book.
More than a bunch.
Yeah.
Actually, the whole book is, I'm talking about very Thai here, was filled with, so I'm trying to communicate information, right, and trying to familiarize an audience with things that are local. And so I was trying, where possible, to use the local term for it. And so there was the question of how do I introduce it? Do I always use the Thai term? Do I sometimes describe it? Sometimes these things can't be said with just a word-for-word translation. It might require a paragraph of explanation.
Yeah,
sometimes
context,
just for the context, and sometimes a few words, or maybe it's relating to just some qualification about something. And then after the book came out, several years later, I got a bit of a shock, and there was this woman doing her master's thesis at Chulalongkorn University. She was doing translation studies, and she had done her thesis on my use of Thai words in very Thai. And she had tabulated every single Thai word that I had used in 13 columns per word. And she had, because in translation, it turns out there are multiple schools of thought and techniques for how do you translate something. And it turned out I had used like every tool available, which to me as an editor, I thought, oh my God, I've been rumbled. This is so inconsistent, and it's mortifying. But it provided her with lots of material. But this thesis is this thick. It's extraordinary. So there is obviously a big debate about this within Thai culture, where she had a lot of things to say about this issue as a whole. So if you want to go to Chulalongkorn Library and read up on it, you're welcome.
Cool. No more questions, right? Thank you so much, everyone. I hope it's been great.